spooky place.
Imagine this. It's 3:07 a.m. Your phone rings, shattering the silence. You answer, only to hear static and then a voice. A voice that shouldn't exist. A voice that whispers, "I see you." What'd you do? For Emily, it was just the beginning. A call from her deceased mother's phone, buried 6 feet under. For Clara, it was a warning she ignored. And for Lena, it was a truth too horrifying to escape. This is the story of the Watcher's Gaze, a tale of an unseen presence that watches, waits, and never lets go. So, before you listen any further, ask yourself, do you really want to know what's watching you right now? The static phone call. The rain fell in heavy sheets, drumming against the window pane of Emily's small, dimly lit apartment. It had been 6 months since her mother's passing, and the grief still clung to her like a second skin. She sat on the edge of her couch, staring at the old family photo on the coffee table, her mother's warm smile frozen in time. The clock on the wall ticked loudly, each second echoing in the silence. Then, her phone rang. Emily jumped, her heart skipping a beat. The sound was jarring, almost unnatural in the stillness of the night. She glanced at the screen, and her blood ran cold. The caller ID displayed her mother's name, Mom. Her hands trembled as she stared at the phone. This had to be a mistake, a cruel prank. Her mother's phone had been buried with her, tucked neatly into the casket during the funeral. Emily had seen it herself, placed gently in her mother's cold, lifeless hands. She hesitated, her finger hovering over the answer button. The phone rang again, the shrill tone cutting through the air like a knife. Against her better judgment, she answered, "Hello." Her voice was barely a whisper. At first, there was only static, a low, hissing sound that seemed to crawl through the receiver and into her ear. Then, faintly she heard it. A voice, familiar, yet distorted, as if it were coming from the bottom of a deep, dark well. "I see you." The words were barely audible, but they sent a chill down Emily's spine. Her breath caught in her throat. It was her mother's voice, but it was wrong. It was hollow, lifeless, and dripping with something she couldn't quite place. Fear, malice. Before she could respond, the call disconnected. Emily sat frozen, the phone still pressed to her ear. Her mind raced, trying to make sense of what had just happened. It had to be a mistake, a glitch, anything but what it seemed. She quickly dialed the phone company, her fingers fumbling over the numbers. The representative on the other end was polite but firm. "Ma'am, according to our records, that phone hasn't been active since the day of the funeral. It's impossible for it to have made a call." Emily's stomach churned. Impossible. The word echoed in her mind. She hung up and stared at the phone, her reflection staring back at her in the dark screen. She tried to convince herself it was nothing, but deep down, she knew better. Something was wrong, terribly wrong. That night, she dreamed of her mother. She was standing at the foot of Emily's bed, her face pale and gaunt, her eyes hollow. She didn't speak, but her lips curled into a faint, unsettling smile. Emily woke in a cold sweat, her heart pounding. The room was silent, but the feeling of being watched lingered. The next day, strange things began to happen. Objects in her apartment moved on their own. The photo of her mother on the coffee table was found face down, even though she hadn't touched it. The air grew colder, and the static from the phone call seemed to follow her, faintly hissing in the background of her thoughts. Then, the call started again. Every night, at exactly 3:07 a.m., her phone would ring. The caller ID always read wrong. Emily tried to ignore it, but the ringing was relentless, each call more insistent than the last. She finally answered one night, her voice shaking. "What do you want?" she demanded. The static hissed, and then the voice came again, clearer this time. "I see you, Emily. I've always seen you." Emily's blood turned to ice. "Mom, if that's you, please stop. You're scaring me." The voice chuckled, a low, guttural sound that made her skin crawl. "You think I'm your mother? Oh, Emily, I'm so much more than that." The line went dead. Emily's mind spiraled. She called the police, but they dismissed her as paranoid. She reached out to a local paranormal investigator, a man named Victor who had a reputation for dealing with the unexplainable. He agreed to meet her at her apartment, his skepticism evident, but his curiosity piqued. Victor arrived with an array of equipment: EMF detectors, audio recorders, and cameras. He listened patiently as Emily recounted the calls, the dreams, the moving objects. He set up his devices and began to scan the apartment. "Most of the time, these things have a logical explanation," he said, adjusting a dial on one of his machines. "But if there's something here, we'll find it." As the hours passed, the devices remained silent. Emily began to feel foolish, her fears seeming more and more irrational. Then, at exactly 3:07 a.m., the phone rang. Victor's eyes widened as he saw the caller ID. He motioned for Emily to answer it on speaker. She hesitated, then complied. "Hello," she said, her voice trembling. The static hissed, and then the voice came through, louder and more distorted than before. "You brought a friend, Emily. How thoughtful." Victor's face paled. "Who is this?" he demanded. The voice laughed, a sound that sent shivers down both their spines. "You can call me the Watcher. I've been watching Emily for a long time. Watching and waiting." Emily's breath quickened. "What do you want from me?" The static grew louder, almost deafening, and then the voice whispered, "Everything." The call ended abruptly. Victor stared at the phone, his earlier skepticism replaced by a look of genuine fear. This shouldn't be possible. Before Emily could respond, the lights in the apartment flickered and went out. The room plunged into darkness, the only light coming from the faint glow of the phone screen. The air grew icy, and the static from the calls seemed to fill the room, surrounding them. "We need to leave," Victor said, his voice urgent. "Now!" But it was too late. The door slammed shut on its own, and the sound of footsteps echoed through the apartment. Footsteps that weren't theirs. Emily's heart pounded as she realized the truth. This wasn't her mother. It had never been her mother. The Watcher had been waiting, and now it was here. The last thing Emily heard before the darkness consumed her was the voice, whispering in her ear. "I see you." Weeks later, Victor's equipment was found in Emily's abandoned apartment, along with a single audio recording. On it, Emily's voice can be heard, faint and desperate, repeating the same phrase over and over. "I see you. I see you. I see you." The phone was never found. The days turned into weeks, and Emily's apartment remained empty, a hollow shell of the life she once lived. The police had closed the case, labeling it a missing persons file with no leads. Victor, the paranormal investigator, had vanished alongside Emily, leaving behind only his equipment and the chilling audio recording. The building's other tenants began to move out, one by one, whispering about the strange occurrences that followed Emily's disappearance. Lights flickered in the hallways, phones rang in empty rooms, and the air carried a faint, metallic scent that no one could explain. But the story didn't end there. Months later, a young woman named Clara moved into Emily's old apartment. She was new to the city, a freelance writer looking for affordable housing. The landlord had been eager to rent the place, offering a discounted rate and avoiding any mention of the previous tenant. Clara didn't ask questions. The apartment was spacious, with large windows that let in the sunlight during the day. It felt like a fresh start. But on her first night, Clara felt it, the unease. It started with the faint sound of static, like a radio tuned to a dead channel. She brushed it off as her imagination, but the feeling of being watched lingered. She tried to ignore it, burying herself in her work, but the strange occurrences grew harder to dismiss. The first call came at 3:07 a.m. Clara jolted awake, her heart pounding as the shrill ringtone cut through the silence. She fumbled for her phone, squinting at the screen. The caller ID read unknown. She hesitated, then answered. "Hello." Her voice was groggy, laced with irritation. At first, there was only static. Then, a voice, soft, distorted, and chillingly familiar to anyone who had heard the stories. "I see you." Clara froze. The voice was faint, almost a whisper, but it carried an undeniable weight. It sounded wrong, like it was coming from somewhere far away, yet somehow right beside her. "Who is this?" she demanded, her voice trembling. The static grew louder, drowning out any response. Then, the call disconnected. Clara sat in the dark, clutching her phone. She told herself it was a prank, a wrong number, anything but what it felt like. But deep down, she knew something was off. The air in the room felt heavier, colder. She couldn't shake the feeling that she wasn't alone. The next morning, Clara did what anyone would do. She Googled her address. The search results were flooded with articles about Emily's disappearance and the strange events that had plagued the building. She read about the phone calls, the moving objects, the whispers in the dark. Her stomach churned as she realized what she had walked into. Determined to uncover the truth, Clara reached out to Victor's assistant, a woman named Lena, who had been left behind when Victor vanished. Lena was hesitant at first, but Clara's persistence paid off. They agreed to meet at the apartment. Lena arrived with a box of Victor's old notes and equipment. Her face was pale, her hands trembling as she set up the devices. Victor believed there was something here, she said, her voice low. Something inhuman. He called it the Watcher. Clara's breath hitched. The Watcher. Lena nodded. According to his notes, it's not a ghost. It's something else, a presence that feeds on fear. It latches onto people, watches them, and then takes them. Clara's mind raced. Takes them where? Lena's expression darkened. We don't know. No one who's been taken has ever come back. As the sun set, the two women began their investigation. The EMF detector spiked in random corners of the apartment, and the audio recorder picked up faint whispers that neither of them could explain. But the most chilling discovery came when they played back the recording from Emily's final night. The audio was garbled at first, filled with static and faint, unintelligible whispers. Then, clear as day, a voice emerged, a voice that wasn't Emily's or Victor's. "You can't hide from me." Clara's blood ran cold. The voice was the same one she had heard on the phone, the Watcher. That night, Clara and Lena decided to stay in the apartment, determined to confront whatever was haunting it. They set up cameras in every room, hoping to capture evidence of the Watcher's presence. But as the hours passed, the atmosphere grew heavier. The static returned, louder this time, and the temperature dropped until their breath was visible in the air. At exactly 3:07 a.m., the phone rang. Clara and Lena exchanged a terrified glance. The caller ID read unknown. Clara hesitated, then answered on speaker. "Hello." Her voice was barely a whisper. The static hissed, and then the voice came through, clearer than ever. "You shouldn't have come back." Lena's eyes widened. "That's Victor's voice," she whispered. The line went dead, and the room plunged into darkness. The cameras flickered, their screens filled with static. Clara fumbled for a flashlight, her hands shaking as she turned it on. The beam of light caught something in the corner of the room, a shadow, darker than the rest, moving against the wall. "Do you see that?" Clara whispered. Lena nodded, her face pale. "We need to leave. Now." But before they could move, the shadow lunged. The flashlight shattered, plunging the room back into darkness. Clara screamed as something cold and unseen wrapped around her, pulling her into the void. Lena tried to grab her, but it was too late. Clara was gone. Days later, Lena returned to the apartment with a team of investigators. They found the cameras, their footage corrupted beyond repair. But one device had survived, a small, handheld recorder tucked into Victor's box of notes. Lena played it back, her heart pounding. The audio was faint at first, filled with static. Then, a voice emerged, Clara's voice. "I see you," she whispered, her tone hollow and lifeless. "I see you. I see you." Lena's blood ran cold. The Watcher had taken Clara, just as it had taken Emily and Victor. But the most chilling part was what came next. As the recording played, another voice joined Clara's, a voice Lena recognized as her own. "I see you." The recorder fell from her hands, shattering on the floor. Lena realized the horrifying truth too late. The Watcher wasn't just in the apartment. It was everywhere, and now it had its eyes on her. The building was condemned shortly after Lena's disappearance. The landlord claimed it was due to structural issues, but the rumors persisted. People said they could still hear the static, faint and distant, if they walked past the abandoned building at night. And if they listened closely, they might hear the whispers. "I see you." The Watcher was always watching, and it was always hungry. Thank you all for watching. Please like and subscribe for more scary stories.